Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday. Lauren, thank you for the introduction, and Plaza, thank you for having me. I'm going to take you through a demonstration today using the new MaimeriBlu Provence kit. So it has 6 different colors in it. We're going to do a smaller landscape using our sheet of paper. So if you received the sample kit, you should have the 90 color dot card, a Aqua Elite round brush, a pencil, and a single sheet. If you didn't buy the colors, I'm going to suggest that you just split your page in half, so that way you have 2 sheets of paper. So to do that, I'm just folding it in half, like so. And then I'm going to take a ruler, fold it the other way.
I'm gonna switch you to desk view, Kelly. There we go.
Perfect. Okay. So I split my page into 2 and I just folded along the middle. And I did that on both sides to create a crease. And then I'll take my ruler so that I have a sharp edge, and all I'm going to do is rip against that ruler. And it'll give you a really nice deckled edge on the side. You can actually do that on all 4 sides if you want to, or you can leave it as is. If you did buy the extra paints and you're ready to work with a full-size sheet, then you don't have to do this step. So with my single sheet now, I want to create a border just like I did in the finished artwork here. So it'll give a matted effect. So I'm using painter's tape. It's really important to use painter's tape and not masking tape because they're different adhesives. So masking tape, you'll just have to be really careful ripping it off your paper after you're done because it does tend to rip the edges a little bit. I'm just going to tape off all 4 sides. One thing you want to keep in mind with the tape that you're using, sometimes the colors is, although it seems like just such a simple thing, the color of your tape will actually influence your color palette. So for this type of work, usually I'd use, because there's a lot of really cool colors in there, a lot of blues and a lot of purples, I'd usually use a blue, but of course I use that one all the time. So I'm out of it. So I'm using green. So we're first going to start with just the drawing. So as I go through, I'm going to be using my pencil. And the reason we're using a 2B pencil is you don't want a pencil that's too hard and you don't want something that's too soft. If you use something that's too soft, it's going to leave too dark of a line, and then you'll see that through your watercolors. And if you use too hard of a pencil, then it'll leave an indent in your paper. And so some of the colors may pool in that area. So what I've done on the side is I'm going to go through step by step, and in red is what we're going to do in that step. So we're going to start off going with a line through the paper. This will be our foreground. So we're going to actually work foreground to background. So it doesn't have to be a straight line. And then our next step is doing the houses in the foreground here, the farmhouses. So you can do a variation of these. You don't have to copy my example. So I've done some different ones here. So you can choose something that's a little bit more challenging or a little easier. So I'm going to go with the third option here. So I'm going to look at about the center of my page. And just off to the right-hand side, I'm going to start with this smaller area here. So I'm going to start with the front, the roof, And then just slightly over that roof, I'm gonna do my next farmhouse. And I did a little entrance on the back. And then on the side, I'm just doing a smaller pop up here. So we're going to keep it really simple. We're not going to do any of the windows. Those will all be details that we add at the end. So just beside that farmhouse, I'm just doing a little shrub here. I'll just give everyone a second to catch up. And just keep in mind, this is recorded and it's gonna be posted. So if you do find this is moving too quickly and you're having trouble catching up, you can always refer back to the video and pause and do the video at your own convenience. I'm gonna leave this on the left or on the right here, and I'm gonna move on to the third step. So the third step is when I'm really starting to build some dimension into my work. So in the foreground here, I have the lavender field. So those are all gonna be directional lines. I'm not drawing any of the details. I'm just mapping out where those are gonna go. And this will help bring your eye into your work. So moving on to the fourth step, we're gonna do our first hill there. So taking it to around the area where my shrub is, I'm just gonna do a hill with directional lines pretty much parallel to the first line that I drew. Then we're gonna do our second hill here. So just looking at the top of my farmhouse, I'm gonna draw a line touching the top of my farmhouse. And then a hill over. And then finally, we're gonna do the horizon line. So you're gonna draw a line going into this hill. And then a soft line going just above. So now we're going to move on to the painting part. I'm going to leave the final step here just so you can see the outline. And just to make it easy, I would recommend taking your dot card and just locating the paints that we're using. So I've circled on mine. Throughout the painting part, I'm going to refer to them as paint number 1, which is your golden yellow, paint number 2, which is the cobalt green blue, number 3, which is the cerulean sky blue, number 4, which is the ultramarine violet, number 5, which is your Verzino violet, and number 6, which is your Potter's pink. So these are all colors that you'll find in the Provence kit. This is currently on order at Plaza. You can get the open stock colors right now, but this will be coming soon. So on my right-hand side here, what I've done is I've drawn out in red what the main colors in those areas are. So What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start with a larger brush. I'm gonna use the Princeton Neptune brush. This is a synthetic squirrel. It's really, really soft. It holds a lot of water. So I like using this for wash applications. So we're gonna move background to foreground for this application. So all I'm gonna do is just wet my brush and we're gonna do a wet on wet technique. So all I'm gonna do is just wet my sky area. And now I'm gonna take at the top of my sky, I have that really beautiful cobalt green blue. So I'm gonna start with that color. So that's number 2. And I'm gonna do a single stroke along the top of my sky and just kind of work my way down. But I'm gonna stop as I get close to the horizon because that's where I'm gonna focus some of my yellow. So I'm gonna go in with number 1, which is the golden yellow. And I'm gonna do a single stroke at the bottom. And you'll see because this is a wet on wet technique, it's gonna blend itself. So it'll create a gradient effect without you having to do any blending on your own. So while we're waiting for the sky to dry, I'm gonna jump in and do the water because if I do the background horizon right now, it's gonna blend into my sky. So I'm gonna take my Neptune round and I'm gonna take number 3, which is the cerulean sky blue. And I'm gonna paint just under my horizon and around my hills. And this is a pretty diluted wash. I want this to be pretty light. Keep in mind when you are laying down colors, watercolors dry 30% lighter. So don't be afraid to when it's too dark. It'll lighten when it's dry. Now we're going to move into the foreground. So I'm kind of skipping layers as I'm going so that nothing bleeds into each other. So for the foreground, I have this really beautiful light wash of the golden yellow. So you'll find with these paints, they're very pigment concentrated. So a little bit goes a really long way. All these pigments use the maximum amount of pigment in each color. So I'm just going to go and cover my entire foreground with this light wash. And if you find you do have any of your watercolor seeping into your houses, that will be a lighter area. So the front of our houses, you can just go with a wet brush and just lift off some of this pigment.
Um, Kelly, could you remind us what the color is for the foreground wash?
Yep, so the foreground wash is number 1, which is the golden yellow.
Thank you.
And while you're done your foreground, you can go into your houses. Just be really careful if you're If your water is still wet, you're just gonna wanna really carefully place the color. So I'm completely coloring my houses here. The great thing about this set is it consists of some transparent colors and some semi-transparent, which I really like in watercolor because it allows those colors to really shine through and create a lot of depth in your work. So just with my ring finger, I'm just gonna really lightly tap around my sky just to see if it's dry. So my water is still a little bit wet. So what we're gonna do while we're waiting for that is we're gonna switch to our Aqua Elite, and this is a size 10. The difference between the Aqua Elite and the Neptune, I like to have both when I'm working on a project because one is a lot softer and holds a lot of water in the belly. And this one is a synthetic Kolinsky sable. So it holds a lot of color, but it keeps a really, really fine point, has a little bit more snap to it. So when I'm doing some finer detailed work, I prefer to use this brush. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do the shadow areas. So I wanna create a really neutral color. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my number 4, which is my ultramarine violet, and I'm gonna take a little bit of my golden yellow, number 1, and I'm gonna mix those together. A really simple rule of thumb when you're doing shadows is mix the complementary color, and it'll give you a really nice shadow, nice natural shadow. So I'm adding a little bit more purple because I want more of purple tone shining through. And I'm just gonna place it on the back side of my farmhouse. And then you'll see just under the house here, bring a little bit of that purple down onto your foreground. And because your foreground is a little bit wet still, it'll blend a little bit into your foreground. Now we're gonna go back into our horizon. So for the horizon, I use number 5. So I'm gonna dilute this color because this is a really strong color, and I want anything in the dark in the background would be more muted. So I'm gonna create a wash, and I'm still using the Aqua Elite round brush, and I'm gonna start at the top. And then you'll see I transition to blue along the edge. So I'm gonna go back to my number 3, which is what I used for the water. And I'm just gonna lay it down at the bottom where the water meets my horizon. And because it's wet on wet still, it'll blend really nicely. I wanna use a little bit more pigment for this area because I want there to be separation between the water and the horizon. I'm gonna jump to my first hill here where I focus a lot of my ultramarine violet. So I'm just taking that single color, creating a diluted version.
So Kelly, when you get a second, could you review the colors again you're using, the 5 or 6 colors, and then um, use the color names when you're referencing them? I think people are having trouble finding the colors you're using as you're going along.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
So the golden yellow is number 1. Number 2 is the cobalt green blue. Number 3 is the cerulean sky blue. Number 4 is the ultramarine violet. Number 5 is the Verzino violet. And number 6 is potter's pink. So I'll say both as I go through.
Perfect, thank you.
And then my back hill here, I'm still using the ultramarine violet, but I'm also going to use a little bit of my cerulean sky blue. So I'm going to wet this area just with a clean brush. So again, using the wet on wet technique. And I'm going to focus my cerulean sky blue on the left part of my hill. And then I'm going to use number 4, which is the ultramarine violet, on the far side. And it's going to blend together. And if there are any areas that you wanted to lighten a bit, you can take your a wet, clean brush and just lift off some of the pigment and dab it on a paper towel. Okay, so now we're going to move into the foreground where we're doing these really beautiful lavender hills. So for this, I'm going to be using variations of color. I'm going to be using number 5, which is the Verzino violet, number 4, which is the ultramarine violet, a little bit of potter's pink, which is number 6. And then as I move further to the right-hand side, I want it to be a little bit cooler. So I'm going to add some of the cerulean sky blue. So I'm going to start off with number 5 with the Verzino violet. I'm going to take it along the left-hand side of each area. And then while it's still wet, I'm going to use number 4, which is the ultramarine violet. And I'm going to put it on the left-hand side. And I'm just going to let those colors blend. As I move further to the right-hand side, that's where when I'm going to start to introduce some more blues to create some cooler tones. So I'm still using the same color. So I'm starting off with the Verzino Violet. And the Ultramarine Violet. And then I'm going in with the Cerulean Sky Blue. And just cooling down some of that area. And you'll see I'm starting to introduce some smaller strokes just to create some interest and some details. So I'm going in on the left-hand side, I'm going in with number 3, which is the Cerulean Sky Blue. And just adding some texture and some details, and it's going to blend into my wet colors. And on the left-hand side, I still want those colors to be more on the purple side. So I'm using the ultramarine violet and doing the same thing, just small strokes, just to create some texture and some details. So I'm just dotting some of that color in, and where it's still wet, it'll blend. I'm focusing a lot of these details just on the front of these lines, just because as you move further into the background, you would lose a lot of these details. So you'll see here, I have some shadow areas in the foreground, but I'm going to wait until this is completely dry before I add those in. So I'm going to jump to doing the lines on my hill with the ultramarine violet. So I'm going to take my liner brush, and I'm just going to draw over those pencil lines that I made previously. And this will have a similar effect to what we did in the foreground. All the lines are really intentional with this composition, so it all brings your eye into our farmhouse, which is our focal point. So now with our liner brush, we're going to take the Potter's Pink, which is number 6, and we're going to do the details on our house. The liner brush makes it really easy to create some straight lines. So I'm just creating some details on the roof over top of the golden yellow wash that I did. And at this point, because we've already laid down the shadow area of our house, you can go in and do your windows and add those smaller details. And I'm just going and really gently outlining my house with that same potter's pink. I want to just crisp up some of my background lines here. So I'm going to go back in to my horizon line with number 3, which is the cerulean sky blue. And just with my liner brush, just focus it on the horizon line and around my second hill here, just at the edge. So you'll notice when you go through a project, you'll start with a larger brush and work your way down to a smaller brush as you work through more detail. And that's really the same thing I'll do with any medium, whether it's watercolor or oil. I'll start with as big a brush as I can because then you won't get too finicky when it gets down to the details. So now what I'm going to do, still with that liner brush, I'm using number 5 and number 4, so the ultramarine violet and the Brazino violet. And I'm just going back in with the liner brush because this is mostly dry, and I'm just adding some stems and some smaller details to my foreground. And as you go back to your palette and load your brush, try and experiment with some of the different colors and create some different variations. So every time I go back into my palette, I'll add a new color. So I'm going to introduce some more of the cerulean sky blue. The Rosino Violet's one of my favorite in this range. A lot of the magentas, you'll see a lot of the magentas are really, really vibrant, really pigmented. All these paints are manufactured in Italy. And what I find with paints that are manufactured in Italy, because their reference point is sunshine, a lot of their colors are really, really vibrant because they need those colors in order to paint their landscapes. It's actually a really nice story how these paints came about. So Gianni Mameri and his brother Carlo Mameri. One was an artist and one was a scientist. And Gianni was trying paints and wasn't really happy with any that were on the market. So he decided with his brother to create their own watercolor paint and their own oil paint and acrylic. And what they focus on with all their lines is purity. So quality pigments, whether they're organic, inorganic, or genuine pigments. And the binder, which in this case is Cortafan gum arabic, and which is the most desirable for a watercolor binder because of its clarity. So it won't affect your colors when they're dry.
Kelly,
Mhm.
would you be able to maybe tell us the colors, the numbers that are on your houses and the lavender fields? I don't
Yep.
know if you can lift up that sheet so we can see those numbers a little bigger too while you're
Mhm.
going over that.
Yeah. So for the houses, so on the lightest side, it's number one, which is your golden yellow. And then on the side, it's still that number one. So still your golden yellow, but you're adding some ultramarine violet to it. You're adding the complementary color so that you can create a shadow color.
Can you slide your palette over? I actually can't see your colors there. There we go.
And then in the foreground here on my lavender field, I use number five, which is the Verzino violet, and number four, which is the ultramarine violet. And then as I move into the right-hand side of my field, I introduce more and more cerulean blue just to bring some cool colors into it. And so now I'm at the stage where I'm just adding some more details. So every time I go back into my palette with my liner brush, I'm going to introduce some different colors, just going back between the three colors, my Verzino violet, my ultramarine violet, and my cerulean blue.
Donna has a question about the paints. Are these paints staining, or transparent?
Yeah, so some are staining, some are transparent. So if you look at the side of the tube, or if you look at your dot card, you'll be able to see just underneath the dot, you'll see staining negative, staining plus. So staining plus means it's more of a staining pigment. And then just in the middle there, you'll see transparent, which will be a white box, or you'll see semi-transparent, which is half, or a full, which is opaque. So in this palette specifically, there's a combination between semi-transparent and transparent colors. And what's great about these colors, because they're all single pigmented, you can intermix them and it takes longer to get to the grayscale. So you have a larger amount of really, really vibrant colors. It would be similar if you take, say, a tube of paint that has three pigments mixed in to make that one color. As soon as you mix one more pigment, it's like you've already mixed four colors. So it'll gray down really quickly. I'm gonna go back in now and do the little shrub beside my farmhouse. So for that, I'm gonna use my golden yellow, number one, and a little bit of my cobalt green blue. So I'm gonna start off on the right-hand side of my shrub with that mixture that I just made. So kind of a darker green. And then I'm gonna clean my brush, and just with water, I'm gonna blend that into the left-hand side so that the left-hand side of my shrub is a lot lighter. And then I'll take a little bit of my Potter's Pink and just do the branch. So because these are all transparent colors that we're working with, it gives you the ability to layer and you can still see the colors beforehand shining through. So you'll see I'm doing a lot of layering in the foreground. You'll notice the ultramarine violet, you get a lot of texture with that color because it's a granulating pigment. Something to really keep in mind when you are working with watercolor, especially when you're first starting out, is there's a paint consistency that you want to keep in mind when you're laying down color. And a great analogy that's used by a lot of watercolor artists is the tea to cream consistency. So the more water you have is a tea consistency. So this is a lot of water, but just enough to see the pigment, flows really easily and beads up. So when you're working on your palette, a good way of testing this is, so right now, so see how my color is really, really just slowly dripping down. So this would be a cream consistency. If I added more water to it, where it's flowing a lot more freely, that would be more like a tea coffee consistency. And the reason that's important is because when you're laying down your color on a dry surface or a damp surface or a wet surface, it'll perform a lot differently. So just to show you an example here. So this is my tea consistency, and this is the difference in how it behaves on a dry surface, a damp surface, and a wet surface. So when it's really wet, it spreads a lot easier, so you have less control. A milk consistency, you'll see on a dry surface, I pick up some of the textures of the paper, but then moving into damp, it spreads a little bit, and wet, I have less control. And the butter consistency is when you add no paint to the water. So I'm just taking the paint right out of the tube, and you'll see how much texture I pick up from the paper. So this technique you should use really, really sparingly. So this could be also called a dry brushing technique. And the reason you want to use this sparingly is because it can really overwhelm your painting if you're doing too much of it. So the only time I ever use a butter consistency is when I'm doing final touches, say in a landscape where I have some highlights that I want to pick up. So if I did want to do that, I would maybe draw some attention to the foreground of my lavender field but for this painting specifically, I think it looks a lot more softer. And because I want to generate interest more with directional lines, I'm not doing as much dry brushing. So once the foreground is dry, we're going to go in with a mixture of the Potter's Pink, the Brizo Violet, and a little bit of our golden yellow. So I'm going to mix the Potter's Pink and the Brizo Violet first, just because they're really overpowering pigments. And in a separate area, I'm going to get some of my golden yellow and just start to introduce some of that color. Because you'll see I barely used anything and it's already really changing the color. So always add your darker pigments to your lighter pigments. I'm also going to use this same color for some of my shadow areas. So once it's dry, I'll start to introduce some of that color. So I'm using my Aqua Elite 10. And I'm just focusing this color between these two lanes. So you'll see you get some sharper lines when you do this. That's because we're going with a wet on dry technique. I'm gonna add just a little bit more pink for this shadow area on the right-hand side. So if your area on the right-hand side is dry, you can go over and just pop that color in over top of your yellow. And you'll see how much it makes the blue pop in that area because this is a little bit more on the orangey side. So it really brings out that blue. And if you did want to go back and lighten any areas, you can go in with a clean brush and just lift off some of that pigment. Now, because I have so much brightness in my foreground, I want to just bring some pops of color back into my farmhouse. So I'm going to go back and you'll see in this finished picture, the purple is a lot more prominent in my shadows. So I'm going to go back in and layer. And because these are transparent, they'll still show those colors that I have, but I'm just going to make them pop a little bit more. So I'm going to add more purple and go in with a really light wash right underneath my roof. So you'll see I did a stroke right underneath the roof, and then I'm just going to blend that color down. And it'll just help to balance my composition a little bit because I have so much vibrancy in the front, in the foreground. So I'm going in with just ultramarine violet, going right underneath my roof, cleaning my brush, and then bringing some of that pigment down. Now that orangey color that we mixed for the foreground here, I'm going to add a little bit of my ultramarine violet to that just to neutralize it a little bit. And I'm going to use that just to darken my shadows where the top of my hill is, right where my farmhouse is. And if you want to reintroduce any of those details after doing the shadow on your on the side of your farmhouse, you can go back in and just go over your windows a little bit if you need to. And you can add, now's a good opportunity to add some other details. So I'm going to add just a little bit of a fence here, just behind my first farmhouse. And I'm using the Potter's Pink to do that. Once your paper is dry, you can slowly peel back the tape. So you'll see that I'm not pulling it up, I'm pulling it flat against the surface. So this will help prevent any tearing, especially if you're using masking tape. But see, it leaves you with a really, really crisp border. And then you have your finished piece. So once it's done and you take off the tape, you can sign the bottom. I'll usually just go in with a pencil. Or if you prefer, you can use your liner brush actually on your artwork. Are there any questions about any of the products or any of the steps?
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, add them to the chat. We'll ask Kelly as they come in. It's beautiful. I love these landscapes. They're so pretty. It's a nice combination of colors.
Yeah, they're so vibrant.
Are there any other types of subject matter that you find this color palette is good for?
So I actually really like using this color palette for portraits because the mixability is so strong with these colors, and for portraits especially because there's so many layers. These layer really beautiful because this set is mostly transparent colors.
Cool. Elaine is asking if you teach other classes.
I do. I teach some oil. I teach in a variety of different mediums. So I do some oil, some watercolor, some drawing, some acrylic.
So while oh, there, can we buy this palette? If you're talking about the colors, the set, yes. Plaza will have them in stores very soon. The individual colors are available to put together if you want to get them right away. but the set will be available in stores, and then we'll also be adding them online as well. It's called the Provence set. Anna's asking, what distinguishes this paint from other brands?
That's a really good question. So this would be a professional grade watercolor. So it's overwhelming when you go into an art store because there's so many different brands, so many different products, and you're like, where do I start? What do I get? So it's important to know the difference between a student grade and a professional grade, and you just have to work with whatever works best for you as an artist. So what I always tell my students is you want to get a good paint. You want to get a student artist or even better, a professional, but it's not a professional paint isn't necessary for someone who's just starting out. However, if you get a cheap quality and a lower quality, you're going to be fighting it a little bit more. So you'll get more frustrated. A student quality may have a lesser quality binder or lesser quality pigments, and there may be more pigments to make up that one color. So, like I was saying earlier, if you have two tubes of paint and one tube of paint has three pigments and the other one has one pigment, that's already like you're mixing four colors together. So you're already getting to that grayscale. When you get into the more professional artist quality paints, a lot of them will be single pigment or will have many single pigment colors. And this just gives you, as the artist, the ability to intermix the colors and create your own vibrant colors without it getting to the grayscale too quickly. So for artists that do tend to mix their own colors once they get at a certain level and they want that flexibility, they're able to do that.
Very cool. And there are other sets, right? In addition to the Provence set. What are some of the other collections?
Yeah, so I actually have them right beside me. So So there's the Tuscany set, which is one of my personal favorites because I
Ooh.
just automatically gravitate to those really rich reds and those really like sage-like greens, those deep greens. Then there's the Sahara set, the Arctic set, which is really beautiful, and the Venice set. It's kind of fun to paint with these because if you're not necessarily there, you can always just pretend.
Yes. Live vicariously through the color palette.
Exactly. But they make it really easy too, because if you know that you're gonna paint, say, a forest landscape, doesn't necessarily have to be Tuscany. This set's already ready for you. It picks the colors for you. This one specifically has two colors that are some of my favorites. The green gold, which is really unique. Oh, actually, I'll show you a swatch here. So the green gold works really, really well for an underpainting if you're doing like a morning dew landscape. So it is this one here. So really, really beautiful yellow green. And then there's the dragon's blood, which is a really popular one. And I can't tell if it's for the name or for the color, but it's a really nice, rich, almost a reddish burnt sienna. But that mixed with, I'll use that color if I'm doing any portraits. That color I will use with an ultramarine blue, and it makes really, really beautiful shadow colors. Even if you're doing a landscape and have some rocks, the shadow color on the rocks, it brings so much warmth and so much interest and vibrancy into the piece. So those are some really great colors that are more unique to the MaimeriBlu line.
Very cool. And we will be bringing all of those sets in, so stay tuned with us. If you're subscribed to our email list, we'll be sure to announce when they are available in the stores and online. So we're excited about that. Now that we have about 15 minutes left, I'd love to do a little show and tell of everyone's work. If everyone is at a good stopping point, we'd love to see if you want to turn your cameras on. You can set your Zoom view to gallery view, and then you can see everyone's work together. Um, so if everyone wants to share, go ahead and show your work on screen. I'd love to see it.
Oh,
Ooh.
beautiful. Wow, really beautiful.
Oh, Jean, that's great. So vibrant. And Kelly, oh, they're so great.
Wow, very nice.
Those are
Beautiful.
amazing.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Great. And while we're doing that, any other last questions from anyone? This was a really great workshop. I was excited to see the new sets for sure for the watercolor. I want all the sets.
Yeah, I had fun with them.
Okay, great. So if there are no more questions, I think we'll go ahead and close this out for the day. Just a little early. That's great. Hope you guys are enjoying these workshops, and we hope to see you on the next ones, future ones, and that are coming up. All you repeaters out there, and maybe you first timers will come join us for another one soon. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Kelly, for joining us. Have a good day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
The recording will be available tomorrow.